Bonjour les gars. Ok, d'accord. Vous connaissez déjà la situation au niveau de la frontière nord de notre pays. On arrive tant bien que mal à, on va dire, à sécuriser notre zone. Il faudra être professionnel tout le long de cette manœuvre.
This Special Forces unit is part of the Northern Operational Zone. Its mission, to prevent armed groups from entering Ivory Coast. We were granted permission to accompany a patrol on the condition that we do not reveal the soldiers' faces or position. For the next 10 hours, this unit will patrol the border.
The High Command put in place a strong deterrent system to prevent any incursions. Units have been deployed at strategic locations to secure the area and reassure communities that had begun to feel isolated.
The unit stops several times in remote villages to meet with traditional leaders.
Ils sont venus voir comment ça va ici. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas de problème? Est-ce que les gens arrivent à partir au champ?
One day, the jihadists came to our mosque. After prayers, they surrounded the building and threatened us. If the military hadn't been stationed nearby, we would have all fled to Abidjan.
Along this porous and poorly defined border, the army faces two major threats. One, the jihadist groups that continue to expand across the region, although they have not carried out a major attack in Ivory Coast since 2021. A second threat comes from the VDPs, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, initially created to fight terrorism, but which are increasingly crossing into Ivorian territory. In this village, wanted by the VDPs, the army has established a border outpost to assert Ivory Coast's sovereignty. Just a few months ago, they managed to raise the Burkinabé flag here.
The VDPs have killed many people. They want these border villages to become part of Burkina Faso. For the Ivorian authorities, this is Ivory Coast, but they disagree. They claim this village belongs to Burkina Faso.
A claim that is sometimes supported by residents whose families live on both sides of the border. But for many, fear has become a daily reality.
This is a large village, but many people have left and moved across the border to Burkina Faso. The fields we cultivate straddle both countries. Some of those who left Ivory Coast and took up arms over there were farmers. They still come back to work their fields, but now they carry weapons, and if you run into them, anything can happen.
The officers declined to comment on the situation. So we turn to the commander of the Northern Operational Zone.
I think there is sometimes a tendency to exaggerate the reality on the ground. Most of the VDPs who cross the border are people who have lived in this area for a long time. Out of habit, they may sometimes believe they are still on Burkinabé territory, but through dialogue they generally come to understand the situation. We have always managed to resolve these issues through conciliation and without escalation.
For now, restraint remains the order from Abidjan in an effort to prevent tensions from escalating. Yet, the VDPs have caused casualties in Ivory Coast. In this village, just 2 kilometers from Burkina Faso, 4 people were killed during an attack several months ago. At the time, Ivorian authorities referred only to unidentified armed individuals.
Since this village was founded, we've never seen anything like this. We can barely feed ourselves anymore because they burned all our fields during the attack.
Fearing retaliation, this witness remains anonymous.
The VDPs came to the village and attacked us. It was retaliation because we refused to join them. They wanted us to take up arms and fight alongside them against the terrorists. But I told them we wanted no part in that. We've never even seen terrorists in our village, so we weren't going to take up weapons and go and fight them in Burkina Faso.
Following the attack, some residents fled the village, fearing further violence. This resident sought refuge with relatives in the town of Dorupu after losing 3 members of her family that day.
I struggle to look at this photograph. Every time I see it, my heart breaks. When I was still there, I was so frightened in the days that followed that I couldn't eat or sleep. That's why I came here. Back there, I grew rice and maize, and I had a cashew plantation. Here, I have nothing to do, and no means of making a living. I survive thanks to the help of other people.
The insecurity is depriving residents of their livelihoods. This is particularly true for the region's many cattle herders. Livestock theft has become one of the main sources of income for armed groups, both jihadists and VDPs.
This is the cattle that was stolen and that we managed to get back.
Thanks to a network of mutual assistance and information sharing among herders, his cattle were found.
Everyone who owns cattle is afraid. You can't go a week or 2 without hearing about another theft. The people stealing cattle are armed now. They often target a herdsman, threaten him with a gun, and take his animals.
Securing this border region has become more difficult due to relations reaching a low point between Abidjan and Ouagadougou. Burkina Faso's military leader, Ibrahim Traoré, regularly accuses Ivory Coast of acting as a staging ground for jihadist groups operating in the region.
We began to witness acts of hostility against us. As long as they remain in that mindset, forget about de-escalation, things will only go from bad to worse.
These political tensions make security collaborations difficult. During our reporting, a jihadist attack struck Burkina Faso just 20 kilometers from the Ivorian border. Yet, because of the lack of cooperation between the 2 armies, Ivorian forces were unable to seal off the necessary border crossings. In the absence of meaningful cooperation with its neighbor, Ivory Coast is seeking to strengthen its intelligence capabilities. Since 2021, the country has invested in surveillance drones and establishing this training center at a military base in the west of the country.
We've received coordinates indicating the location of a weapons cache. We'll try to locate it and maintain continuous surveillance to give the commander intelligence ahead of a possible operation.
These drones, which can be operated up to 5 kilometers away, were funded by the European Union. Here, European instructors teach Ivorian trainers.
Make the turn and bring it back to 0. That's it. Stay centered. There's the speed, there's the altitude, and then there's a visual checklist that must be completed every 5 minutes to ensure the flight is proceeding correctly.
But military officials know that security measures alone will not be enough to contain the threats facing one of the country's poorest regions. In this village, just a handful of kilometers from the border with Burkina Faso, the army is inaugurating a new health center with great ceremony. A first for the military, which hopes the project will strengthen ties with local communities.
You live in a border region, an area that is particularly sensitive and exposed to the terrorist threat. The decision to carry out this project here is intended to spare you long and difficult journeys. It is also a way for us to show our solidarity with you, so that together we can keep this region safe and at peace.
A welcome initiative at a time when local communities are facing increasing hardship. In the town of Dorupu, the social welfare center is always busy.
The food I was given is almost finished. I also need money to pay my rent.
We'll do our best to respond to these urgent needs. We'll begin with a home visit.
Social workers are trying to support not only residents, but also refugees fleeing insecurity in Burkina Faso and Mali. In March, authorities had recorded 115,000 refugees and asylum seekers, a growing challenge made even more difficult by the sharp decline in international aid over recent months.
The UNHCR used to provide assistance to asylum seekers, but that support has diminished considerably. As a result, asylum seekers increasingly turn to the social center as their only source of help. The state provides us with resources, but the growing number of asylum seekers means those resources are no longer sufficient. We're seeing rising poverty, and that poverty can have consequences. Some young people may turn to harmful activities or even be recruited into armed groups.
Although Ivory Coast has established 2 refugee camps, both have long exceeded their capacity. As a result, many refugees, like Musa and his family, are being hosted by local communities.
There was an attack in my village, so I left. I fled Burkina Faso and sought refuge in Ivory Coast. Since arriving here, I've been asking for help. I've been looking for work to support myself and for land where I can farm.
This community leader has hosted more than 3,000 people in his home since the crisis began in 2021.
These are the belongings of the refugees. At the moment, around 20 people are sleeping here. There are so many of them that I've had to remove my furniture and store it away. We settled them here on these mats. In the past, everyone who arrived would be registered and then transferred to the Camara camp. Now they stay with me much longer.
Ivorian authorities recently granted refugee status to nearly 90% of newly registered asylum seekers, a symbolic policy shift intended in part to attract renewed international support. Yet, as violence continues to spread across the Sahel, communities along the border remain caught between insecurity, poverty, and uncertainty.